This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Literary Briefs. Okay, this is Drinking with Authors, Literary Briefs episode. We're already drunk. My name's Erica Lance. Well, some of us are already drunk. Go ahead and introduce yourself, my lovely co-host today who's not drinking with us.
Yes, it's Vanessa Valiente, and I am cold stone sober with my spring water. Sorry, I told my drink before you. I'm sorry.
So disappointing. I'm
drinking water, guys. Erica, what are you drinking?
You have to introduce the guest before asking her what she's drinking.
This is why I'm not the main host.
Just edit it later.
Now you have to do it, Vanessa. So.
And this is Kristin Durfee.
Yay!
And I am definitely several drinks in, so.
All my bottles in the recycling. So I'm drinking Blue Moon, by the way. I don't know why Vanessa said what she was drinking. Okay, you're drinking local IPA though, right?
I am. So I started and am finishing with the Deviant Wolf Matter Days, which is a strawberry lemonade Berliner. And then I switched to Tart Shape Box, which is a sour blonde. So if you heard the beginning of the episode, like I said, I like those kinds of drinks to like squish this part of your ear that like kind of gives that tingle. And all of those do that. So if you are into local sours, definitely check out Deviant Wolf. They're in the Central Florida area. And like I said, I'm on my third one right now and they do the job.
That is awesome. I realized I'm on number 4. So, but I did put oranges for anybody who's looking at the, well, now I just said it out loud. So you'll hear.
So do you do oranges or is that how you're keeping track? Like, do you have 4 oranges because you're?
No, I actually just switched out the oranges because I realized they weren't as fresh as they needed to be. Because anyway, that was fucking bougie of me. I put oranges in my drink. I'm very proud.
I'm drinking out of a can right now, so
that's okay. I the only reason is because I cut up an entire orange when I was drinking this yesterday. I was like, I cut a couple slices and I was like, I better cut the whole thing, and I put it in a Tupperware. And now I'm like, look, I have oranges. Look how bougie I am.
Your past self was doing your future self a favor.
Yes, it rarely happens, and I'm so glad my past self decided to pick this activity versus the 10 million other things it could do. Okay, this is supposed to be rapid fire questions, but we already have the answer to one of the rapid fire questions, which is your favorite book of all time. So now we need to know your least favorite book of all time.
My least favorite book. Okay, so I know that I told you guys where to find me on social media, but if this upsets you, feel free to just like at Drinking with Authors and not me specifically. But I will say I hated with like a passion that is almost my hill to die on, Gone Girl. I absolutely
really?
Yeah.
I haven't read the book. I obviously have seen the movie.
I refuse to watch it because of how passionately I hated that.
I have to know why.
But I literally, like, toward the end of it, I was like really hoping that everybody would die. Like, that's how passionately. The fact that I liked the scrubs from the trailer park the best of anybody in that book. I really, I'm sorry. And I know there's lots of people that love that book. And I usually am not someone to like judge somebody's taste in things, but I feel like that's almost like a swipe left or right question for me, that if you liked Gone Girl, I don't know. It makes me think a little bit differently.
You're talking to somebody who tries to invite authors on her podcast, and routinely, like E.L. James will never be 1, invited to the podcast, or 2, will I talk to her because she's fucking terrible. I read through 6 pages of the first book in Barnes and Noble because everybody was talking about it, and I was like, no fucking way. I refuse to watch the movies, even on a girls' night. I refuse to give this woman any money at all because she's a fucking horrible writer. And I think it's terrible. So you can have any opinion you want to have.
I think Gillian Flynn is a good writer. I just absolutely fucking hated that book and all the characters. It was nothing like, I think she was talented. I just thought they were.
Other books and like actually liked it, like Sharp
Dark
Object.
Places wasn't bad. I've read other things, but yeah, that one like because so I should also say, and this like totally biases me, so don't like read a book or not read a book based on my opinion, but I am not a fan of the unreliable narrative trope that's like happening right now. Like it really kind of fucking annoys me. And sorry, Mom, for cursing, because I know you're going to listen probably to this podcast. But that is like, when I hear like that in a description of a book and stuff like that, I've read a few of them and that's just not my jam. And so I think that was one of the first like really big unreliable narrative kind of books.
Yeah.
And that I've just discovered that's not for me.
I felt that way about Girl on a Train. I figured right away. Well, it made me upset because I was like, okay, because I want something. If I'm gonna watch something set in like the real world, I need you to like just I don't know. I just don't want to come up with the answer after a couple chapters. Like I figured it out who it was, and I'm like, really, guys? Like, come on. I know we could have done better. Though the acting was really great in the movie.
I did like the movie.
Emily Blunt, she is a goddess. Yeah, that disappointed me.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's just so take it or leave it. If unreliable narratives is your jam, you will love Gone Girl, so you should go read it. But it is just not mine.
It's interesting that you said that. It brings up the entire topic, and Vanessa, you assisted with this too, even though you're only drinking water, is that and I can give an excuse to Jen who's allergic to alcohol, but I'm gonna kill you if you co-host with me with water again. I'm just saying. I'm just warning you.
At least put a lemon in it or an orange.
Like it's not even that. It's like generic store brand water. It's not even like I'm gonna be bougie and drink.
But it's Publix. There's nothing. And for those who don't live where a Publix is, I mean, it's a pretty awesome grocery store. It's
the true story.
Delicious spring water.
Are you seriously defending your choice in generic water right now?
Because it's Publix.
It's Publix. Gosh.
Okay, I'm moving back onto the entire like soapbox I was about to be on and ignoring you.
You walk up that hill.
A beautiful person. Is there are some books I have to say that when I read the book, even if I was forced to read it, and then I watched a movie version or a show version or something, I was actually impressed. And then I have the other ones where I want to fucking kill whoever the screenwriter is, right? Like I'm like, I want to kill you. I kind of almost wonder for you if Gone Girl would have been that way.
Maybe. My like intense hatred prevents me from being able to watch that movie.
E.L. James,
or maybe I should try.
Can't go anywhere near it. Although I don't think those movies probably would fucking wow me if I got anywhere near them. But
I mean, I will say like the last Twilight movie I thought was better than the book. I like kind of the different directions that they turned, which that
twist at the end.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was
I was impressed by that.
I know. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Actually, my brother, who like doesn't like sappy stuff, we had somehow me and my sister-in-law convinced him, or at the time was his girlfriend, convinced him to go, and he came out of there like, oh yeah, that was awesome. Like he got his head ripped off and stuff like that. Like I was like, dang, I was like, they succeeded.
Yeah. So maybe I shouldn't totally write off Gone Girl. My husband said it was a very good movie. So.
I have to say, you know, for somebody who actually is a fan of Ben Affleck, which I could get killed for saying that because I actually am, I thought the way they did that movie was very good. And I'm one of those people that does generally, the only movie that ever kind of threw me off completely a little bit was Fight Club. Because the way they did Fight Club initially, like, and he's like, is this a test? And then he's like, and he says, you know, we've just lost cabin pressure. I was a little like, what the fuck just happened? Like, but it was one of the few movies, because normally just my analytical way, the way I look at things, again, I think this goes back to the Nancy Drew thing I thought is I can usually pick apart. And a lot of times they do it in a way not recently, but where they kind of spoon fed you a little bit of what was happening with the plot. I don't think they do it as much anymore as they used to. But I have to say, Gone Girl actually was a pretty good book. But on the Twilight thing, I'm just going to say my favorite line in any of those movies was literally when Jacob goes, "That's because I'm hotter than you." I literally, every time I see that, because it's
Love Jacob's character. I feel like that like made me keep coming back to it personally. I'm not necessarily like, I'm not gonna like wear a t-shirt. Like I'm not like
you're
that
not Team Jacob, you're not gonna be
not like, but I, you know, it's more of the, like I said, coming to it older and looking back, like it was a more logical decision that she should have picked him as like a good life partner.
yeah.
But I can also fully acknowledge that I'm like old and that it's lost on me.
What is it? Your best friend creeping on your daughter in the future? Like,
So yeah, that I gloss over that part of it.
Well, have you guys, just in the spirit of this, so she put out Midnight Sun, which is Edward's retelling. So I have a friend of mine that has a really cute reading voice. And so there's a bunch of us that haven't been able to see each other. We used to go to coffee like once every couple of weeks, and we'd go to Barnes and Noble, and we had this thing where we'd go to the romance aisle, pick a random book and pick a page, and we would read the page, like random book, like let's just read the page. Some of them were delightful, and some of them I don't understand why they're on the fucking shelf at Barnes and Noble, but that's a different topic. And so we hadn't, and she bought the book Midnight Sun, and of course I'm like, I won't buy it. I didn't buy the Twilights, a friend bought them for me, so I read them. And she's like, do you want to read this? And it's Edward's retelling of Twilight, right? Any level of creepiness that you felt in Twilight, times that by 1,000 fucking percent. And that is this book. And it's funny because
you sold me on it. No, I'm kidding.
it's actually, to me, I want to say almost it's a better book because it explains so much, but makes it even worse that she thought Edward was a good idea.
oh,
I will admit, so I am a really big audiobook person. And so I'm also like a huge library proponent, like get Overdrive, get it on your phone, get Libby, whatever. Like it's such an awesome freaking resource. So I listened to the Twilight books, and the girl who reads them is the bomb. So I think part of my liking them was also her. So I haven't gone back and done that one. I haven't done the Ballad of whatever the prequel for Hunger Games.
The Ballad of Song and Snow.
Yeah,
something.
I listened to the audiobook.
I did the audiobooks of both of those.
Yeah, and actually the audio, whoever who hasn't read that book, the audio guy is fantastic on that book. I really enjoyed it. I just haven't finished it yet.
Yeah, so there's certain books where I feel like I maybe fairly or unfairly like them more and or less because of the person who reads them. And there's like audiobook crushes that I have, which like, again, total tangent. Like if you're on one of these like Overdrive, Libby, you can actually search by the person who reads the audiobook and like voice stalk like somebody who you really like and listen to all of their stuff that they read, which I totally do.
I'm glad you brought that up though, because this is something I tell people all the time. Unlike editors and stuff like that, people don't realize how important editors, typesetters, all these behind the scenes people are for the creation of good book. A really good editor keeps the pacing of a book good, and you don't realize you should probably look up that editor because they're going to keep the pacing of a book good in all of the books they do, right? Nobody thinks about that. Look, mind blown. But the thing about, and I've said this from the beginning, narration, people follow narrators. So It doesn't matter what the fuck they're reading, people will listen to them narrate a book. And I will say this, if you haven't read Y-O-U, and the follow-up on Netflix, I
watched the show.
Brilliant with the show, but listen to the audiobooks. Because part one, the second show, the first show is way closer to what happens in the book, right? The second, no, it's not. It's not bad. I love the second series. It's not bad. But I will say this, the guy who reads the book, because it is completely, the book is 1000% written, his first person, only his POV. You're not getting other POVs. You are only getting his POV. And you're getting his, and I have to give this author credit whose name I can't remember, but you are getting his very warped POV on everything everyone around him is doing and how it plays off of his view.
Which
of
that's what gets you buy-in,
because you have a very strong character voice. Like I watched the show. I didn't read the book, but I did pick up the book at the bookstore just to kind of like look through the pages. And I read the first page. And I'm like, oh my god, this show had managed to capture it. Like you read an author how skilled they are. Like I can hear the character telling me this. Like that's how strong the voice is.
I'll have to look at the audiobook because, like I said, I know some people like don't really like audiobooks. I challenge them to figure out if they don't like the reader and they should try different ones. I always say like start with Michael Crichton's Timeline. That is like the gateway drug to audiobooks as far as I'm concerned, because the reader is awesome and the story is awesome. But I mean, there are totally books that I've tried. I will, just to be full disclosure, I tried to read and both audiobook Gone Girl. So I tried both versions of it and it was not happening. So I did my due diligence to like that damn book.
You tried every way around. No, because that's true, because I've read books that I listened to the audio narrator and I'm like, this is horrible. Like, thank God I read the book, or vice versa. The book was horrible, but when you have the narrator acted out or played out, it's much more entertaining.
And there's one that sometimes, so there's two books that I remember. So The Life of Pi and Wuthering Heights. So they are both one that I tried to read the book of and just like couldn't do it. And then listen to the audiobook. And at least for Wuthering Heights, I'm like, oh, this is a gossip story. It's one guy telling the story. Like it totally went over my head. And the same with Life of Pi. I was like, oh, it's an interview. Like I didn't understand that was happening until the voice of the audiobook person changed and I realized it was a different narrator. So there's certain things that you might not quite get. So like I said, I also kind of encourage people that like if they try a book and don't like it, try the audiobook version and vice versa, because there's a couple that they just like evidently went over my head and I didn't understand what was happening. And it wasn't until the different voices that the audiobook person used that I was like, oh. And then you get the flip side of it. So like I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd. And so those audiobooks by Jim Dale are unreal. And he is a great audiobook person, but he also evidently only has so many voices. So I listened to the audiobook of The Night Circus, which is also a phenomenal book, but he reads it and uses a lot of the same voices. So it became a little odd to me because I was just putting Dumbledore in places in The Night Circus that didn't happen. So there is also like a typecast that can kind of happen, I think, when you listen to someone that's like iconically reading one thing to then go to something else. Like I said, it's one of those that if one form doesn't work for you, try the opposite and vice versa. But if you get your library app, I mean, you can luckily try that stuff for free,
Yeah, actually, if someone's out there like wanting to try out audiobooks and never done it, you can actually, for the most part, find an actor you love, like in a movie. And a lot of like Reese Witherspoon did the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, even though I heard the book is horrific.
I loved it, but probably because she read it.
But her reading it, I've actually I listened to a sample and she busts out her Southern accent and she was fantastic. Tim Curry, I listened to Sabriel, which is a young adult fantasy by Garth Nix. I mean, Tim Curry is, Tim Curry. He's amazing. And if any Buffy fans out there, the guy who played Spike, James Marsden, he also does audiobooks. So
Ooh.
there's definitely audiobooks out there for everyone. I
I
believe.
did recently, so Tom Hanks wrote a book and then he also audio narrates it. It's called Uncommon Type and it's so good. It's all about typewriters, which you would think would like be mind-numbing, but it's a bunch of short stories and in some way a typewriter's in it or a main character or a main like thing that moves the story along or something, but he reads them and it's, I mean, he's a national treasure. I feel like anyway.
Yeah.
I like Team Tom Hanks,
I
but
listen to
such a
Ready
good
Player One from Will Wheaton again. Ready Player One, Will Wheaton narrates it.
Yes.
Will Wheaton can narrate anything for me, and I will listen to him
haven't
narrate
listened
it.
to that. I'll have to add
Oh
that.
my God,
That
I
all-
love his voice.
Yes.
But author advice, I know we're on a tangent, and
We're on a tangent, and I'm sorry. I told you to
No,
do
this is great.
Stop apologizing. We're allowed to be on tangents.
making me drink, and it's like 6 o'clock, and normally I have 3 beers by this time.
Luckily, this show and its sponsors and shit don't care, so it's fine. But I will say this: I think for authors, just to tie in on author relevance point, we at Four Horsemen, we are huge proponents of your book comes out in paperback or hardbook or hardcover, whichever. It also comes out obviously as an ebook, but it comes out as an audiobook. Every single book comes out as an audiobook because I think people don't realize the impact of audiobooks and how to do it. But do your fucking research on this and how to go about doing it, how much you should pay for it, and find a voice that you truly love and truly is your voice of the story. And if you're an author and you're any good at communicating, it is actually not that hard to record your own book.
Mhm.
And you're going to say your book. I mean, I'm not going to argue that Will Wheaton or Tom Hanks might say it better because they're Will Wheaton and Tom Hanks. But if you're not of the level to, or Reese Witherspoon, afford any of these actors, James Marsden, then maybe narrate your book yourself if you have the right voice for it, because you're going to give so much depth to this story that no narrator will give, because this story is yours. It's in your head. You know every back part of the character. You know why that character is saying that line or doing that action, and you can put that inflection in it that no narrator will be able to do because they're not in your brain, which is good because that's illegal.
Well, actually,
even pronunciations, because oh gosh, I cannot remember the name of the book, but I just recently listened to it, and they had, and this is again, you know, for the authors out there that are doing this, word to the wise, if you're going to have 2 different narrators do both of your characters, make sure they pronounce everybody's names the same. Because I had gotten 3/4 of the way through a book thinking there were 2 characters because each narrator pronounced the name differently. And it wasn't until I got to this one point that I was like, holy shit, it's the same person. So I was like blatantly confused through part of it where like I knew I was supposed to be shocked at certain things happening, but I literally thought there were 2 different characters because they pronounced them differently. And I was like, whoever edited this thing, I was like so pissed that they didn't catch it, you know, on the editing portion of it, that I was like, oh, they're the same person.
You know,
Okay, so go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say like because I'm also an editor for other people's, you know, work, and I actually use audiobooks to like, because when I'm reading someone's book, I'm also trying to hear it as if that character's saying it to me. And audiobooks are such a great way to learn pacing and just listen to the flow of how someone says something. So when you go back to edit someone else's work or your own work, then if you're getting stuck, imagine like you trying to read that as a narrator and you'd be like, no, this sentence needs to be fixed because maybe it's too wordy, or it's a great way to kind of like get that pacing down. It's just listening and internalizing what's the smooth way of saying something.
Okay, so you just said that, but another piece of writerly advice. Look how I'm tying this back to the actual intent of the podcast.
Actually accomplishing the podcast and not just drinking.
Yeah. which is rare for me because I'm really fucking good at drinking.
I mean, I'm pretty much drinking.
Is read your work out loud in front of people and not your cats. Read your story out loud when you're in front of a group, whether it's a writer's group, whether you're whatever, open mic. Take your story and read it, because I can tell you, I learned this lesson. I'm willing to throw myself on the sword. Some of the short stories I initially, because that's how I got published at first, was short stories. And I read the short story, reading it, not out loud with the voice. And I was like, okay, this makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, I didn't have the greatest editor in the world, didn't catch stuff. But when I actually had to start reading these stories out loud at public events, I was like, wow, this doesn't, it's not smooth. I can't just read it. I can't just tell the story. I have to modify it. And if you have to do that, it tells you that you need to fucking go edit your work. Because if you can't read it out loud as a story, it's not workable.
Yeah.
So that's advice I have for that. Okay, let's rapid fire questions. Vanessa.
No, we got through like one. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. This is one of the funnest
Take
podcasts.
full responsibility for the shit show that this podcast is. I keep
never have this guest on here again. She is the ruiner of everything. No,
I know. Yeah. Welcome to your 4-hour podcast. You're going to have to listen to because I can't stay on topic.
Okay. Rapid fire question. Do you have one, Vanessa? Because I have one.
Ooh, oh, okay. Do you use any kind of writing software, or do you write by hand? Like, what's your method of getting your story down? Do you use Scrivener, Word? What do you use?
Okay, so I for those who listen to the first part and who will like have access to the YouTube and stuff, so I handwrite a bunch of stuff. So I handwrite my plot. I can type faster than I can write. And so like my brain thinks too fast. So my first book, I hand wrote a good chunk of it. But I also like didn't own a laptop at that point and like just had a PC. And so it was kind of like necessity, because I'd be like sitting on the couch, like kind of writing it. So I do use a laptop. I do just use Word. I, as I'm sure you guys have figured out, am a fairly busy individual. So I did a couple of years ago, because I do try to participate in Nanowrimo, so National Novel Writing Month in November, as much as I can. I force myself not to do it this year because so my answer to like having to edit books is I just write a new one, because I don't really like editing. So I have like 2 books in my like queue that I just keep. I'm like, well, I'll just write a new book instead of like working on this like horrible dumpster fire that is these last 2 that I've like written that need a lot of work. So anyway, so if you are someone who participates in Nano and you win, a lot of times they like give you some things. And so I don't know if they do it every year, but one year you got like Scrivener.
Every year. Just
every year.
Okay. They do it every year. Yes.
Okay. And so I got it and I tried it, and like, I will say I'm just someone that, because of the way that I write and because of the fact that I do the plotting, I don't need all the bells and whistles that Scrivener does. So like the keeping track of characters and all that stuff, like I do that on paper. I can fully acknowledge that I'm going to get burned by this at some point, but I'm just like powering through until that happens. So when I do my plotting and like write my chapters, like I just write them one after the other and then like check mark them off when I'm done.
Watch our YouTube, you should, because she's got a bunch of shit written down and then check marks, so you can tell she already marked that shit down.
Oh yeah, I'm like a total psycho. So I'm not saying this is necessarily like what one needs to do to be an author, because I can fully acknowledge that this is like type A nuts. So like, don't feel like this is like the checkbox that you need to do to like be successful. But so I had started with Scrivener and I could tell there was like a level of learning curve that I was just not willing to base the like limited amount of writing time I had to learn it. So like, if you are someone that is like just starting out or is looking for something new, like absolutely look at those programs. They have great tutorials and all this kind of stuff. If I have an hour or a half an hour that I can write something, I'm freaking writing. So like to me, it's not worth learning a new program when I kind of have a system that works for me. So I just use Word. And that, like I said, so far has worked for me. At some point, if I get burned by it, I'm sure I'll look elsewhere, but knock on wood, until that day comes, I'm just going to be a dinosaur and not learn new shit and just like do it the way I do it.
Oh my God.
So it's not a very fancy answer, but I just use a notebook and Word.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
Literally zero wrong with that. Okay, because even though we got 2 questions out, we do have to wrap up the podcast.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You did stop apologizing. This is your
Responsibility.
podcast, and you can come back on the podcast. You can pontificate to your heart's content.
We can have an encore.
Yeah.
Just give me an open mic and I'll just like talk ad nauseum.
Like, and here is the 12-hour open mic. No,
I know. Here are the musings of rambling, the drunk rambling.
what is the number 1 piece of advice you'd give an author?
Oh, okay. So you can't edit a blank page.
Ooh,
True.
I like it.
Freaking write something down. You can always fix it. Just
Hashtag true story, or you can dump it and write something else.
yes, but just like as much as you can, don't worry about if it's good. Of course it's not fucking good. It's terrible. Like that's why you edit. That's why no one gets to see a first draft. Like I don't let my beta readers read anything till probably draft 6 or 7. And that's probably being generous to myself. Like just write something down. It's going to be messy. It's going to be terrible, but then you can fix it. You
love
can't
this
fix
advice.
it if it's not there.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So outside of actually giving your house address away, tell people how to find you.
Yes. So again, I'm on Twitter. So at Kristin Durfee, Kristin. And then also Facebook, Kristin Durfee author, and KristinDurfee.com. So like I said, you can sign up for my newsletter there. I do it marginally quarterly, so I'm going to inundate your inbox or anything like that, but that's how you'll know. I do tend to release like 1 or 2 short stories a year, and then 1 novel every year or 2. So just so that you're kind of up to date on stuff.
Up to date quarterly on things and stuff. People can see that watch the YouTube, FYI. So
Definitely quarterly, and I set reminders and I have my shit together. But like maybe twice a year. So about that.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, and your next book coming out is called
Mass, MASS, on March 23rd by Orange Blossom Publishing.
And this will come out right before that. So do pick up that book. If you absolutely should have listened to the first episode, but if you didn't, I will hunt you down and kill you. But you would figure it out if you did. So
it's good. So just get it. Actually, you don't even have to read it. Just get it.
Yeah, just buy it. Pre-order it. Pre-order it right now because we need those numbers. Yes. You have been fantastic. We have loved talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Absolutely. We will have you again. This has been Drinking with Authors. I'm Erica Lance.
I'm Vanessa Valiente.
And we'll see you next time.